Dragon Age the Veilguard Codex, the World of Thedas. Codex Entry, the Anderfels. The Anderfels are a land of shocking extremes. It is the most desolate place in all the world, for two blights have left great expanses of the steppes so completely devoid of life that corpses cannot even decay there. No insect or grub will ever reach them. It is a land filled with wonders, like the Murdain, with its gigantic white statue of Our Lady carved into its face, her hands outstretched and bearing an eternal flame, or Weishaupt Fortress, with its walls of living rock towering over the desolate plains below. The Anders, too, are a people of extremes, the most devout priests and the most deadly soldiers, the poorest nation in the world and the most feared. From In Pursuit of Knowledge, The Travels of a Chantry Scholar, by Brother Genetivi. Codex Entry, Andraste, Bride of the Maker. There was once a tiny fishing village in the waking sea that was set upon by the Tevinter Imperium, which enslaved the villagers to be sold in the markets of Minrathos, leaving behind only the old and the infirm. One of the captives was the child Andraste. She was raised in slavery in a foreign land. She escaped, then made the long and treacherous journey back to her homeland alone. She rose from nothing to be the wife of an Alamari warlord. Each day she sang to the gods, asking them to help her people who remained slaves in Tevinter. The false gods of the mountains and the winds did not answer her, but the true God did. The Maker spoke. He showed her all the works of his hands, the Fade, the world, and all the creatures therein. He showed her how men had forgotten him, lavish in devotion upon mute idols and demons, and how he had left them to their fate. But her voice had reached him, and so captivated him that he offered her a place at his side, that she might rule all of creation. But Andraste would not forsake her people. She begged the Maker to return, to save his children from the cruelty of the Imperium. Reluctantly, the Maker agreed to give man another chance. Andraste went back to her husband, Matharath, and told him all that the Maker had revealed to her. Together, they rallied the Alamari and marched forth against the mage lords of the Imperium, and the Maker was with them. The Maker's sword was creation itself, fire and flood, famine and earthquake. Everywhere they went, Andraste sang to the people of the Maker, and they heard her. The ranks of Andraste's followers grew until they were a vast tide washing over the Imperium. And when Matharath saw that the people loved Andraste and not him, a worm grew within his heart, gnawing upon it. At last, the armies of Andraste and Matharath stood before the very gates of Minrathos, but Andraste was not with them. For Matharath had schemed in secret to hand Andraste over to the Tevinter. For this, the Archon would give Matharath all the lands to the south of the Waking Sea. And so, before all the armies of the Alamari and of Tevinter, Andraste was tied to a stake and burned while her earthly husband turned his armies aside and did nothing, for his heart had been devoured. But as he watched the pyre, the Archon softened. He took pity on Andraste and drew his sword and granted her the mercy of a quick death. The Maker wept for his beloved, cursed Matharath, cursed mankind for their betrayal, and turned once again from creation, taking only Andraste with him. And Our Lady sits still at his side, where she still urges him to take pity on his children. From the Sermons of Justinia II. Codex entry, Antiva. In the rest of the civilized world, it is common belief that Antiva has no king. I assure you, gentle readers, that this is untrue. The line of kings in Antiva has remained unbroken for 2,500 years. It is simply that nobody pays any attention to them whatsoever. The nation is ruled, in truth, by a collection of merchant princes. They are not princes in the literal sense, but heads of banks, trading companies, and vineyards. Their power is conferred strictly by wealth. But Antiva is not primarily renowned for its peculiar form of government, nor for its admittedly unparalleled wines. Antiva is known for the House of Crows. Since Antivans are well known for being good at everything but fighting, it is more than a little ironic that Antiva possesses the most deadly assassins in the world. Their fame is such that Antiva keeps no standing army. No king is willing to order his troops to assault her borders, and no general is mad enough to lead such an invasion. The attack would likely succeed, but its leaders would not see the day. From In Pursuit of Knowledge, The Travels of a Chantry Scholar by Brother Genetivi. Codex entry, Arlathan, Part 1. Before the ages were named or numbered, our people were glorious and eternal, and never changing. Like the great oak tree, they were constant in their traditions, strong in their roots, and ever reaching for the sky. They felt no need to rush when life was endless. They worshipped their gods for months at a time. Decisions came after decades of debate, and an introduction could last for years. From time to time, our ancestors would drift into centuries-long slumber. But this was not death, for we know they wandered the fade in dreams. In those ages, our people called all the land Elvenan, which in the old Elven language means place of our people. And at the center of the world stood the great city of Arlathan, a place of knowledge and debate, where the best of the ancient elves would go to trade knowledge, greet old friends, and settle disputes that had gone on for millennia. But while our ancestors were caught up in the forever cycle of ages, drifting through life at what we today would consider an intolerable pace, the world outside the lush forests and ancient trees was changing. The humans first arrived from Par Velen to the north. Called Shemlen, or Quicklings, by the ancients, the humans were pitiful creatures whose lives blinked by in an instant. When they first met the elves, the humans were brash and warlike, quick to anger and quicker to fight, with no patience for the unhurried pace of elven diplomacy. But the humans brought worse things than war with them. Our ancestors proved susceptible to human diseases, and for the first time in history, elves died of natural causes. What's more, those elves who spent time bartering and negotiating with humans found themselves aging, tainted by the humans' brash and impatient lives. Many believed that the ancient gods had judged them unworthy of their long lives and cast them down among the quicklings. Our ancestors came to look upon the humans as parasites, which I understand is similar to the way the humans see our people in the cities. The ancient elves immediately moved to close Elvenan off from the humans, for fear that this quickening effect would crumble the civilization. The Fall of Arlathan, as told by Gizharel, keeper of the Arlathan clan of the Dalish Elves. Codex Entry, Arlathan, Part 2. You ask what happened to Arlathan. Sadly, we do not know. Even those of us who keep the ancient lore have no record of what truly happened. What we have are accounts of the days before the fall, and a fable of the whims of the gods. The human world was changing even as the elves slept. Clans and tribes gave way to a powerful empire called Tevinter, which, and for what reason we do not know, moved to conquer Elvenan. When they breached the great city of Arlathan, our people, fearful of disease and loss of immortality, chose to flee rather than fight. With magic, demons, and even dragons at their behest, the Tevinter Imperium marched easily through Arlathan, destroying homes and galleries and amphitheatres that had stood for ages. Our people were corralled as slaves, and human contact quickened their veins until every captured elf turned mortal. The elves called to their ancient gods, but there was no answer. As to why the gods didn't answer, our people left only a legend. They say that Fen'Harel, the dread wolf and lord of tricksters, approached the ancient gods of good and evil and proposed a truce. The gods of good would remove themselves to heaven, and the lords of evil would exile themselves to the abyss. Neither group ever again to enter the other's lands. But the gods did not know that Fen'Harel had planned to betray them, and by the time they realized the dread wolf's treachery, they were sealed in their respective realms, never again to interact with the mortal world. It is a fable, to be sure, but those elves who travel the beyond claim that Fen'Harel still roams the world of dreams, keeping watch over the gods lest they escape from their prisons. Whatever the case, Arlathan had fallen to the very humans our people had once considered mere pests. It is said that the Tevinter Magisters used their great destructive power to force the very ground to swallow Arlathan whole, destroying eons of collected knowledge, culture, and art. The whole of elven lore left only to memory. The Fall of Arlathan, as told by Gizharel, keeper of the Arlathan clan of the Dalish Elves. Codex Entry, Beyond the Veil, Spirits and Demons. It is challenging enough for the casual observer to tell the difference between the Fade and the creatures that live within it, let alone between one type of spirit and another. In truth, there is little that distinguishes them, even for the most astute mages. Since spirits are not physical entities, and are therefore not restricted to recognizable forms, or even having a form at all, one can never tell for certain what is alive and what is merely part of the scenery. It is therefore advisable for the inexperienced researcher to greet all objects he encounters. Typically, we misuse the term spirit to refer only to the benign, or at least less malevolent, creatures of the Fade, but in truth, all the denizens of the realm beyond the veil are spirits. As the chant of light notes, everything within the Fade is a mimicry of our world. A poor imitation, for the spirits do not remotely understand what they are copying. It is no surprise that much of the Fade appears like a manuscript, translated from Tevinter into Orlesian and back again by drunken initiates. In general, spirits are not complex, or rather, they are not complex as we understand such things. Each one seizes upon a single facet of human experience: rage, hunger, compassion, hope, etc. This one idea becomes their identity. We classify as demons those spirits who identify themselves with darker human emotions and ideas. The most common and weakest form of demon one encounters in the Fade is the rage demon. They are much like perpetually boiling kettles, for they exist only to vent hatred, but rarely have an object to hate. Somewhat above these are the hunger demons, who do little but eat or attempt to eat everything they encounter, including other demons. This is rarely successful. Then there are the sloth demons. These are the first intelligent creatures one typically finds in the Fade. They are dangerous only on those rare occasions that they can be induced to get up and do harm. Desire demons are more clever and far more powerful, using all forms of bribery to induce mortals into their realms. Wealth, love, vengeance, whatever lies closest to your heart. The most powerful demons yet encountered are the pride demons, perhaps because they, among all their kind, most resemble men. From Beyond the Veil, Spirits and Demons, by Enchanter Murdrommel. Codex entry: The Crows and Queen Madrigal. The first crow refused to speak, even when we put hot coals to the soles of his feet and peeled the skin off his face and hands with a paring knife. He opted, instead, to chew through his own tongue and choke to death on the blood. The second captive repeated what we already knew. Queen Madrigal went on a hunt and did not appear for the evening's festivities. Her body was later found with 4 steel swords through the chest. I asked what he knew about one of the 4 swords being a replica of Hassarian's Sword of Mercy. He had not heard about that, or at least claimed as much. He later died on the rack, smiling slightly. The third crow must have realized he would not leave the dungeon alive. He seemed to hope that by angering Master Fior, he would earn himself a quick death. The crow tried our patience with pithy comments while Master Fior was trying to work. At one point, he made a remark about Fior's mother, which I shall not repeat here. I will admit to feeling admiration for his ability to retain a capacity for coherent speech and even some wit under extreme duress. Amid all his useless chatter, this third crow did raise an important point. His guild has a reputation to uphold. They are ruthless, efficient, and discreet. How would they maintain such notoriety if agents routinely revealed the names of employers with something as banal as torture? This gave me pause. I called for a halt to the session. After some thought, I stabbed the man through the heart and set the 4th and 5th Grow captives free. If there is a confession to be extracted, it will not be done with pain. I recommend we abandon this course of action. A report by Captain Aristide, tasked with investigating the assassination of Queen Madrigal of Antiva. Codex entry: the Dalish Elves. Obtained if either the Warden or Inquisitor are of Dalish origin. In time, the human empires will crumble. We have seen it happen countless times. Until then, we wait. We keep to the wild borderlands. We raise Hala and build Aravels and present a moving target to the humans around us. We try to keep hold of the old ways, to relearn what was forgotten. We call to the ancient gods, although they do not answer and have not heard us since before the fall of Arlathan, so that one day they might remember us. Elganon, the eldest of the sun, and he who overthrew his father. Mythal, the protector. Fen'Harel, the dreadwolf. Andrul, the huntress. Falondin, the friend of the dead. Dirthamen, the keeper of secrets. Gillanane, the mother of Hala. June, the master of crafts. And Silazy, the hearthkeeper. We gather every 10 years for the Arlathanen to retell the ancient stories and keep them alive. For when the human kingdoms are gone, we must be ready to teach the others what it means to be elves. Gisarel, keeper of the Ralafarin clan of the Dalish Elves. If neither the Warden or Inquisitor is of Dalish origin. I took the road north from Varroyo towards Nevarra with a merchant caravan. A scant 2 days past the Orlesian border, we were beset by bandits. They struck without warning from the cover of the trees, hammering our wagons with arrows, killing most of the caravan guards instantly. The few who survived the arrow storm drew their blades and charged into the trees after our attackers. We heard screams muffled by the forest, and then nothing more of those men. After a long silence, the bandits appeared. Elves covered in tattoos and dressed in hides. They looted all the supplies and valuables they could carry from the merchants and disappeared back into the trees. These, I was informed later, were the Dalish, the wild elves who lurk in the wilderness on the fringes of settled lands, preying upon travellers and isolated farmers. These wild elves have reverted to the worship of their false gods, and are rumoured to practice their own form of magic, rejecting all human society. From In Pursuit of Knowledge, The Travels of a Chantry Scholar, by Brother Genetivi. Codex entry: Deep Roads. There isn't a dwarf alive who remembers the deep roads as they once were. They were the network of tunnels that joined the Taigs together. To be honest, it isn't even right to give them such a simple term as tunnels. They are works of art, with centuries of planning demonstrated in the geometry of their walls, with the statues of the paragons that watch over travellers, with the flow of lava that keeps the deep roads lit and warm. The cloud gazers up on the surface talk of the Imperial Highway, built by the Magisters of old, a raised walkway that crossed thousands of miles, something that could only have been built by magic. Perhaps it is comparable to the deep roads, although we dwarves didn't need magic. I suppose it doesn't matter anymore. The Darkspawn rule the deep roads now. When Orzammar sealed off the entrances to the deep roads, abandoning everything that lay out there, we handed over the kingdom that was to those black bastards forever. To think that there are Genlocks crawling over Baunamar now, tearing down our statues and defiling our greatest works. Corruption covers everything we built out there. Every dwarf who goes out and comes back says that it gets worse with each passing year. The foulness spread a little further. And the cloud gazers think the Darkspawn are gone, just because they aren't spilling out onto the surface. One day, when Orzammar is gone for good, they'll find out differently. Those Darkspawn won't have anywhere else to go but up, and they'll do it. The surface folk will have themselves a blight that will never end. Transcript of a conversation with a member of the Dwarven mining caste, 890 Blessed. Codex entry, The Fade. The study of the Fade is as old as humankind. For so long as men have dreamed, we have walked its twisting paths, sometimes catching a glimpse of the city at its heart. Always as close as our own thoughts, but impossibly separated from our world. The Tevinter Imperium once spent vast fortunes of gold, lyrium, and human slaves in an effort to map the terrain of the Fade, an ultimately futile endeavour. Although portions of it belong to powerful spirits, all of the Fade is in constant flux. The Imperium succeeded in finding the disparate and ever-shifting realms of a dozen demon lords, as well as cataloguing a few hundred types of spirits, before they were forced to abandon the project. The relationship of dreamers to the Fade is complex. Even when entering the Fade through the use of Lyrium, mortals are not able to control or affect it. The spirits who dwell there, however, can, and as the Chantry teaches us, the great flaw of spirits is that they have neither imagination nor ambition. They create what they see through their sleeping visitors, building elaborate copies of our cities, people, and events, which, like the reflections in a mirror, ultimately lack context or life of their own. Even the most powerful demons merely plagiarize the worst thoughts and fears of mortals, and build their realms with no other ambition than to taste life. From Tranquility and the Role of the Fade in Human Culture, by First Enchanter Josephus. Codex entry, Fen'Harel, the Dread Wolf. There is precious little we know about Fen'Harel, for they say he did not care for our people. Elganan and Mithal created the world as we know it. Andril taught us the ways of the hunter. Silisi and June gave us fire and crafting. But Fen'Harel kept to himself and plotted the betrayal of all the gods. And after the destruction of Arlathan, when the gods could no longer hear our prayers, it is said that Fen'Harel spent centuries in a far corner of the earth, giggling madly and hugging himself in glee. The legend says that before the fall of Arlathan, the gods we know and revere fought an endless war with others of their kind. There is not a Haren among us who remembers these others. Only in dreams do we hear whispered the names of Gelduran and Dernathal and Anaris, for they are the forgotten ones, the gods of terror and malice, spite and pestilence. In ancient times, only Fen'Harel could walk without fear among both our gods and the forgotten ones, for although he is kin to the gods of the people, the forgotten ones knew of his cunning ways and saw him as one of their own. And that is how Fen'Harel tricked them. Our gods saw him as a brother, and they trusted him when he said that they must keep to the heavens while he arranged a truce. And the Forgotten Ones trusted him also when he said he could arrange for the defeat of our gods, if only the Forgotten Ones would return to the abyss for a time. They trusted Fen'Harel, and they were all of them betrayed. And Fen'Harel sealed them away, so they could never again walk among the people. From the tale of Fen'Harel's triumph, as told by Gisarel, keeper of the Ralafarin clan of the Dalish Elves. Codex entry: Fereldan Culture. The Fereldans are a puzzle. As a people, they are one bad day away from reverting to barbarism. They repelled invasions from Tevinter during the height of the Imperium with nothing but dogs and their own obstinate disposition. They are the coarse, willful, dirty, disorganized people who somehow gave rise to our prophet, ushered in an era of enlightenment, and toppled the greatest empire in history. There are a few things you can assume safely in dealing with these people. First, they value loyalty above all things, beyond wealth, beyond power, beyond reason. Second, although they have nothing in their entire country which you are likely to think at all remarkable, they are extremely proud of their accomplishments. Third, if you insult their dogs, they are likely to declare war. And finally, the surest sign that you have underestimated the Fereldans is that you think you have come to understand them. Empress Selene I of Orlais, in a letter to her newly appointed ambassador to Denerim. Codex entry: The Grey Wardens. The First Blight had already raged for 90 years. The world was in chaos. A god had risen, twisted and corrupted. The remaining gods of Tevinter were silent, withdrawn. What writing we have recovered from those times is filled with despair, for everyone believed, from the greatest archons to the lowliest slaves, that the world was coming to an end. At Weissaup Fortress, in the desolate Anderfels, a meeting transpired. Soldiers of the Imperium, Seasoned veterans who had known nothing their entire lifetimes except hopeless war came together. When they left Weishaupt, they had renounced their oaths to the Imperium. They were soldiers no longer. They were the Grey Wardens. The Wardens began an aggressive campaign against the Blight, striking back against the Darkspawn, reclaiming lands given up for lost. The Blight was far from over, but their victories brought notice, and soon they received aid from every nation in Thedas. They grew in number as well as reputation. Finally, in the year 992 of the Tevinter Imperium, upon the Silent Plains, they met the archdemon Dumat in battle. A third of all the armies of northern Thedas were lost to the fighting, but Dumat fell, and the Darkspawn fled back underground. Even that was not the end. The Imperium once revered 7 gods: Dumat, Zazikael, Toth, Andraste, Razikael, Lusican, and Ermethael. 4 have risen as archdemons. The Grey Wardens have kept watch through the ages, well aware that peace is fleeting, and that their war continues until the last of the dragon gods is gone. From Fereldan, Folklore and History, by Sister Patrine, Chantry Scholar. Codex entry: Majestic Bastards. I remember the second last one. I wouldn't get closer than 60 feet, double the wingspan. That left you time to move. The beast was too weak to do much. Still, it seemed respectful to keep the distance and leave its end to animal and trainer. She starved out. Not the way they should go, and not the way I was used to seeing them. Oh, they were majestic bastards, and they knew it. Ask any warden dumped arse over ears for not picking nits. See, trainer and beast had a kinship, and both knew what they wanted. For Griffin, that bond meant grooming. Couldn't fault them. They needed what they needed. I mean, what's fair trade for saddling a warden commander? Full plate, lightning storm, sheer dive straight through an archdemon's wing. Legendary, you can't argue. But back on the ground, they knew they were owed. And you couldn't shortcut and douse them. They had all the majesty of a paddling rat if you waterlogged the feathers. No, it was a grueling task of preening 30 bloody feet of wing. And you'd better remember, or maybe the thing got pissy next flight and cut an oak too close. Give you a love tap so hard your next helm dented. Still, everything in balance. Every talon tipped. There was nothing that compared. You could reach down from the sky and cradle Thedas in your hand. Anyway, yes, I remember the second last one. After she dropped, the robes took some crosscuts, because they do things like that. And then we burnt it. And then I got drunk. I do not remember the very last. And you can't make me. Comments of an unnamed Grey Warden. Excerpt from Weishaupt records on the extinction of treasured species. Liberated for public consideration by Philium Abad. Codex entry: The Imperial Chantry. There are those who would tell you that the Chantry is the same everywhere as it is here. that the divine in Varroyo reigns supreme in the eyes of the Maker, and that this fact is unquestioned throughout Thedas. Do not believe it. The Maker's second commandment, magic must serve man, not rule over him, never held the same meaning within the ancient Tevinter Imperium as it did elsewhere. The Chantry there interpreted the rule as meaning that mages should never control the minds of other men, and that otherwise their magic should benefit the rulers of men as much as possible. When the clerics of Tevinter altered the Chant of Light to reflect this interpretation of the commandment, the divine in Varroyo ordered the clerics to revert to the original chant. They refused, claiming corruption within Varroyo, an argument that grew until in 487 Towers, the Chantry in Tevinter elected its own legitimate and uncorrupted divine Valhale, who was not only male, but also happened to be one of the most prominent members of the Tevinter Circle of the Magi. This black divine was reviled outside Tevinter, his existence an offence to the Chantry in Varroyo. After 4 exalted marches to dislodge these rebels, all that the Chantry in Varroyo accomplished was to cement the separation. While most aspects of the Imperial Chantry's teachings are the same, prohibitions against magic have been weakened, and male priests have become more prevalent. The Circle of Magi today rules Tevinter directly, ever since the Archon Nomoran was elected in 734 Storm, directly from the ranks of the enchanters, to great applause from the public. He dispensed with the old rules forbidding mages from taking part in politics, and within a century, the true rulers within the various imperial houses, the mages, took their places openly within the government. The imperial divine is now always drawn from the ranks of the first enchanters, and operates as divine and grand enchanter both. This is utter heresy to any member of the Chantry outside of Tevinter, a return to the days of the Magisters which brought the blights down upon us. But it exists, and even though we have left the Tevinter Imperium to the mercies of the dread Qunari, still they have endured. Further confrontation between the Black Divine and our so-called White Divine is inevitable. From Edicts of the Black Divine, by Father David of Quarrinus, 811 Blessed. Codex Entry, Lyrium. Lyrium is the king of metals. Beneath our feet, it sings. When properly refined, it is a smooth, slightly iridescent, silvery liquid. In the hands of the dwarven smith caste, it is mixed with steel to produce indestructible armor and blades that hold an edge for centuries. In the hands of the shaperate, it becomes a repository for living memories. And some scholars maintain this as evidence that Lyrium is, itself, alive. It finds its most lucrative application in the hands of the Formari, who use it in conjunction with baser metals like gold, silverite, viridium, or even iron to produce enchantments. Though mages, of course, consume it in a diluted form to bolster their abilities, this is not recommended. Overindulgence in lyrium can have disastrous consequences, particularly in more concentrated amounts. It is not advisable, for instance, that any reader handle raw lyrium, which in many cases can kill on contact. An excerpt from An Alchemical Primer of Metallurgy, Volume 1, by Lord Cerastes of Marnus Pell. Codex Entry, the Magisterium. There is a mistaken impression, outside the Tevinter Imperium, that a Magister is simply a mage, and the mere act of being a mage is all that is required to be among the ruling class. A misperception aided, no doubt, by some Tevinter mages claiming the title outside their homeland to take advantage of its reputation. In truth, being a Magister requires one hold a seat in the Magisterium, the upper house of the Imperial Senate. This is the body that makes laws, and which chooses the new Archon if there is no approved heir. The Senate's lower house, the Publicanium, consists of elected officials, but it has no true power and is considered a bureaucratic body. Magisters, meanwhile, come from the ranks of the Circle of Magi and the Imperial Chantry, but most hold their seats by virtue of an Archon having granted it to their family long ago. It is not technically required for a Magister to be a mage. Indeed, after the transfiguration that saw the old gods abandoned and Andrasteism embraced, most were not. Since the Tower's Age, however, non-mages in the Magisterium have slowly been weeded out. A true Magister is thus a figure of real power in Tevinter. All other mages serve at their pleasure, and any mage not of proper lineage has no influence outside of that which personal wealth and talent provide. From The Ancient North by Sister Patrine, Chantry Scholar. Codex Entry, the Maker. There was no word, for heaven or for earth, for sea or sky. All that existed was silence. Then the voice of the Maker rang out, the first word, and his word became all that might be. Dream and idea, hope and fear, endless possibilities. And from it made his firstborn. And he said to them, In my image I forge you. To you I give dominion over all that exists. By your will may all things be done. Then in the center of heaven he called forth a city with towers of gold, streets with music for cobblestones, and banners which flew without wind. There he dwelled, waiting to see the wonders his children would create. The children of the Maker gathered before his golden throne, and sang hymns of praise unending. But their songs were the songs of the cobblestones. They shone with the golden light reflected from the Maker's throne. They held forth the banners that flew on their own. And the voice of the Maker shook the fade, saying, In my image I have wrought my firstborn. You have been given dominion over all that exists. By your will all things are done. Yet you do nothing. The realm I have given you is formless, ever-changing. And he knew he had wrought amiss. So the Maker turned from his firstborn, and took from the fade a measure of its living flesh, and placed it apart from the spirits, and spoke to it, saying, Here I decree opposition in all things, for earth, sky, for winter, summer, for darkness, light. By my will alone is balance sundered, and the world given new life. And no longer was it formless, ever-changing, but held fast, immutable, with words for heaven and for earth, sea and sky. At last the Maker from the living world make men. Immutable, as the substance of the earth, with souls made of dream and idea, hope and fear, endless possibilities. Then the Maker said, "To you, my second-born, I grant this gift. In your heart shall burn an unquenchable flame, all-consuming and never satisfied. From the Fade I crafted you, and to the Fade you shall return each night in dreams that you may always remember me." And then the Maker sealed the gates of the Golden City, and there he dwelled, waiting to see the wonders his children would create. Threnodes 5:1-8. Codex entry, Nevarra. For the fourth time I attempted to cross the border into Nevarra from Orlais, and was turned back by chevaliers. I decided to take the more roundabout path, a ship back to Fereldan, and then another to Nevarra. The outcome was more than worth the trouble. The whole country is filled with artistry, from the statues of heroes that litter the streets in even the meanest villages to the glittering Golden College of Magi in Cumberland. Perhaps nowhere more astonishing than the vast necropolis outside Nevarra city. Unlike most other followers of Andraste, the Nevarrans do not burn their dead. Instead, they carefully preserve the bodies and seal them in elaborate tombs. Some of the wealthiest Nevarrans begin construction of their own tombs while quite young, and these become incredible palaces, complete with gardens, bathhouses, and ballrooms, utterly silent, kept only for the dead. From In Pursuit of Knowledge, The Travels of a Chantry Scholar, by Brother Genetivi. Codex entry, The Orlesian Empire. There are many lords and ladies in Varoyo, and I mean this literally. Once the system of noble titles in Orlais was a labyrinth. There were barons and baronesses, and baronets, and sir-barons, and a horde of others, each with its own origins and its own nuances of comparison. The Orlesian aristocracy is ancient and much given to competition. All the nobility play the grand game, as it is known, whether they wish to or not. It is a game of reputation and patronage, where moves are made with rumours and scandal is the chief weapon. No gentle game, this. More blood has been drawn as a result of the grand game than any war the Orlesians have fought. Of this I am assured by almost every gentleman here. As far as titles went, everything changed with the coming of the Emperor Drakon, who established the Orlesian Empire as it exists now, and who created the Chantry. There is no more venerated figure in Orlais. In Varoyo, the statue of Drakon stands as tall as the statue of Andraste. Drakon determined that the grand game was tearing Orlais apart, so he abolished all titles beside his own, and lord and lady. I am told, with some twittering amusement, that this action did not end the grand game as Drakon had intended. Now the lords and ladies collect unofficial titles rather than official ones, such as the exalted patron of Tassus Clay or uncle to the champion of Tremay. It is an headache to remember such titles, and one winces to think of the poor doorman at the balls who must rattle them off as each guest enters the room. The aristocracy is different from Fereldan in other ways as well. The Orlesians' right to rule stems directly from the Maker. There exists neither the concept of rule by merit nor the slightest notion of rebellion. If one is not noble, one aspires to be, or at the least aspires to be in the good graces of a noble, and is ever watching for a way to enter the patronage of those better placed in the grand game. And then there are the masks, and the cosmetics. I have not seen so much paints at the kennels at Highever, but that is another story. From Beyond the Frostbacks by Ban Teoric of West Hill, 920 Dragon. Codex entry, the Qunari. The people of the Qun are, perhaps, the least understood group in Thedas. The Qunari wars were brutal, but so was the Chantry schism. So was the fall of the Imperium. Some of this misunderstanding is an accident of nature. The race we call Qunari are formidable. Nature has given them fierce horns and strange eyes, and the ignorant look on them and seem monsters. Some is an accident of language. Few among the Qun's people speak the common tongue, and fewer speak it well. In a culture that strives for mastery, to have only a passable degree of skill is humiliating indeed, and so they often keep quiet among foreigners out of shame. But much of it is a result of the culture itself. The Qunari view their whole society as a single creature, a living entity whose health and well-being is the responsibility of all. Each individual is only a tiny part of the whole, a drop of blood in its veins. Important not for itself, but for what it is to the whole creature. Because of this, the Qunari most outsiders meet belong to the army, which the Qun regards as if it were the physical body, arms, legs, eyes, and ears, the things a creature needs in order to interact with the world. One cannot get to know a person solely by studying his hand or his foot, and so one cannot truly meet the Qunari until one has visited their cities. That is where their mind and soul dwell. In Seheron and Parvalan, one can truly see the Qunari in their entirety. There, the unification of the Qunari into a single being is most evident. Workers, whom the Qunari calls the mind, produce everything the Qunari require. The soul, the priesthood, seeks a greater understanding of the self, the world, and exhorts the body and mind to continually strive for perfection. The body serves as the go-between for the mind, the soul, and the world. Everyone and everything has a place, decided by the Qun, in which they work for the good of the whole. It is a life of certainty, of equality, if not individuality. From the writings of the seer of Kontar, 841 Blessed. Codex entry, Rivain. Nowhere in my travels, not in the heart of the Imperium, nor the streets of Orzammar, have I felt so much an outsider as in Rivain. The chant of light never truly reached the ears of these people. The years they spent under the thumb of the Qunari left most of the country zealous followers of the Qun. But resistance to the chant goes deeper than the Qunari war. The Rivaini refused to be parted from their seers, wise women who are in fact hedge mages, communicating with spirits and actually allowing themselves to become possessed. The Chantry prohibition against such magical practices violates millennia of local tradition. From In Pursuit of Knowledge, The Travels of a Chantry Scholar by Brother Genitivi. Codex Entry, Sexuality in Thedas. What I find most interesting is that, despite the lack of open discussion on matters of human sexuality, there is commonality to be found on the subject in all Andrastian lands. Typically, one's sexual habits are considered natural and separate from matters of procreation, and only among the nobility, where procreation involves issues of inheritance and the union of powerful families, is it considered of vital importance. Yet, even there, a noble who has done their duty to the family might be allowed to pursue their own sexual interests without raising eyebrows. The view on indulging lusts with a member of the same gender varies from land to land. In Orlais, it is considered a quirk of character and nothing more. In Fereldan, it is a matter of scandal if done indiscreetly, but otherwise nothing noteworthy. In Tevinter, it is considered selfish and deviant behavior among nobles, but actively encouraged with favoured slaves. Nowhere is it forbidden, and sex of any kind is only considered worthy of judgment when taken to awful excess or performed in the public eye. From In Pursuit of Knowledge, The Travels of a Chantry Scholar by Brother Genitivi. Codex Entry, Surface Dwarfs. In Orzammar, Dwarven society is divided into rigid castes, with houses that compete for power and prestige. But all that is discarded when a dwarf abandons the stone for the surface. Under the open sky, everyone is equal, or so the story goes. The truth is that thousands of years of tradition are not so easily tossed aside. Even though surface dwarves are officially stripped of their caste, many maintain a hierarchy among themselves along the old caste lines. Formerly noble houses are accorded more respect than casteless brands who come up in search of opportunity. The poorest noble dwarf on the surface looks upon the rich lower caste dwarfs with contempt. Upper-class service dwarf society is roughly divided into two camps. Kalnas, who insist on maintaining caste and rank, typically those from the noble or merchant caste families, and ascendants, who believe in leaving Orzammar's traditions underground and embracing life in the sunlit world. Maintaining some tie to Orzammar was seen for generations as the only lifeline for surface dwarves. Bringing surface goods to their kin underground and lyrium and metals to the surface was not only the most lucrative means of making a living, but also a sort of sacred duty, as many surface dwarfs willingly accepted exile and the loss of their caste to better serve their house or patron. In recent years, many surface dwarves, particularly ascendants, have branched out. They started banks, mercenary companies, and overland trade caravans. They became investors and speculators in purely surface trade. These new industries have proven tremendous sources of wealth, but are looked down upon by their more conservative kin. For less affluent surface dwarves, association with powerful Kalnar can open many doors. They can get credit with dwarven merchants and are offered work opportunities by the powerful Dwarven Merchants Guild more readily, sometimes, than more qualified but less connected individuals. From the Dowager's Field Guide to Good Society by Lady Alcyone. Codex Entry, Tevinter Society. To those outside of the Tevinter Imperium, it is easy to imagine a society filled with mages and elven slaves and little else. In truth, there are 3 different Tevinters, each of them a world completely separate from the others. There are the mages, the land's nobility, completely obsessed with competing for supremacy with each other, almost to the exclusion of paying any heed to the nation's enemies, such as the Qunari. The well-bred Altus sneer at the Latans, who in turn sneer at the Praetari. They vie for dominance in the Magisterium, where factions shift and flow on a daily basis with deadly consequences, requiring every family to put on a veneer of perfect citizenship or face scandal and censure. Then there are the so-called Soperati, the sleepers. These are the non-magical citizens who vastly outnumber the mages, yet are beholden to their whims. Many are resentful of this status, plotting in secret, even as they secretly hope their children will possess magical talent, an enticing lure, since the talent could conceivably show up in anyone, even a slave. It would be easy to forget that Tevinter possesses a massive class of publicans, the civil servants and leaders of the legionnaires. It has an enormous merchant class, enough teeming poor to drown any other nation in Thedas, and the shadowy thieves called the Praesumptor, who are practically treated with respect. And then there are the slaves. One would think they, at least, see each other as equals, but it is not so. The divide between the freed liberati, those who act as personal servants to magisters, those who work on farms and factories, and the servus publicus, who do all the task proper citizens will not. It is all but insurmountable, but perhaps in emulation of those who own them. Imperial slaves will connive and scheme to try anyhow. Outsiders might see it as futile, but to Tevinter citizens, their nation's social classes are the most mutable and rewarding of merit in all of Thedas. From In Pursuit of Knowledge, The Travels of a Chantry Scholar by Brother Genetivi. Codex Entry, The Veil. I detest this notion that the veil is some manner of invisible curtain that separates the world of the living from the world of the spirits. Whether it be called the Fade or the Beyond is a matter of racial politics I refuse to indulge in at the moment. There is no this side and that side when it comes to the veil. One cannot think of it as a physical thing, or a barrier, or even a shimmering wall of holy light. Thank you very much for that image, your perfection. Think of the veil, instead, as opening one's eyes. Before you opened them, you saw our world as you see it now. Static, solid, unchanging. Now that they are open, you see our world as the spirits see it. Chaotic, ever-changing, a realm where the imagined and the remembered have as much substance as that which is real. More, in fact. A spirit sees everything as defined by will and memory. And this is why they are so very lost when they cross the veil. In our world, imagination has no substance. Objects exist independently on how we remember them or what emotions we associate with them. Mages alone possess the power to change the world with their minds, and perhaps this forms the nature of the demon's attraction to them. Who can say? Regardless, the act of passing through the veil is much more about changing one's perceptions than a physical transition. The veil is an idea. It is the act of transition itself, and it is only the fact that both living beings and spirits find the transition difficult that gives the veil any credence as a physical barrier at all. From a dissertation on the Fade as a Physical Manifestation by Marino, Senior Enchanter of the Minrathos Circle of Magi, 655 Steel. Codex entry, Vitaar. After extensive study of the Qunari specimens you kindly provided, I've come to the conclusion that the painted markings on their face and body are not, in fact, solely for ceremonial purposes, but provide a practical benefit. Oh, I'm certain there are some cultural significance to the patterns and colours they choose, but the Qunari do nothing without purpose, yes? They call these markings Vitaar, which in their tongue means poison armour. It's called this because the markings are magical in nature, and actually harden their skin to an iron-like quality without hindering flexibility. And my analysis says the paint consists largely of poison. It's mixed with something else, blood, perhaps their own, and that neutralizes the poison, but only for one with Qunari physiology. Anyone else would perish almost instantly, which reminds me, I'll kindly require another body slave. The process activates the magical qualities of the poison, which provides the protective effects, almost in the same manner that Lyrium runes do. How this works, and whether it can be used for our purposes, will require further study. Perhaps some live specimens this time. From a letter written by Namaria Organis, apprentice to Magister Varas, Dragon 932. Codex entry, Xenon the Antiquarian. I left the Black Emporium empty-handed for two reasons. First, most of the items were priced far beyond what I could afford. Second, I spent most of my short time there trying to sate my curiosity about its proprietor. I found myself stealing glances at the antiquarian, from behind piles of books, between shelves, and at one point over a basket of mismatched socks. There he sat, petrified, in the centre of the emporium, skin of waxy grey over ancient taut sinew, moaning in a voice so dry and brittle it sounded like snapping of twigs after a drought. A girl of not more than 12 scurried to and fro to fulfill his numerous requests. Another patron noticed my fascination and told me that the girl, most likely an urchin rescued from the street, was responsible for the needs of the antiquarian, feeding, washing, and the like. So impossibly old is he, and so fragile his skin, he can only tolerate the barest whisper of touches from the smallest and most tender of his servants. Only in this way may he come close to his lost youth, said the man. I was surrounded by objects of legend, yet none fascinated me as did the antiquarian. From a journal page found in Kirkwall's Darktown, written by an unknown author.